Hello. Um, I've got a talk here for you on Joseph Williamson's Great Tunnel. This is what I think of as the hunt for the Holy Grail. We've been searching for this tunnel for so long, and we haven't had any luck finding it. But we still believe it's there. We still believe it's waiting for us to get into it. I have to admit that until a couple of weeks ago, I'd run out of ideas and couldn't think of a new subject for a talk. But something happened just 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had a visit from one of our best researchers over the years. That's a man called Don Hyam. I hadn't seen Don for several years, since before COVID, and he's lost his wife in the meantime, had a bit of a rough time. But he came over to see us a couple of weeks back, and he brought with him several documents, little snippets of research work that he'd been doing. And one of them was a newspaper report from 1876, and it was about the Great Tunnel. I got very excited about this because I'd never seen this particular piece of writing before. Don may have been sitting on it for years. Other people may have seen it within FOW2, but I had never seen it. This is the one and only photograph of the Great Tunnel that we have. It was found in the York Railway Museum, and we think we've identified it as the Great Tunnel, but there is a little bit of doubt about how this photograph came about. We know it was a photograph taken by an industrial photographer and artist by the name of James Mudd, and this one's been attributed to a date of 1881, and this shows the open end of the Great Tunnel. If you see to the left of it, there's another tunnel, or at least it's an arch. It may not be very deep, and it's a much taller and narrower tunnel. It's been filled in brickwork, and then a hole's been knocked out of it again. For me now, I think this is the giveaway, but that we have to be on the right track, because take a look at this watercolor painting by William Herdman from 1858. He took several looking across Smithdown Lane into what used to be Williamson's workyard and beyond up to the houses on Mason Street. This, I believe, is the Great Tunnel, partly hidden by another structure. And there's that tunnel right next to it. Quite distinctive, much taller, much slimmer, bricked up and then opened out again. And there were a whole series of arches alongside. This series of arches in the Great Tunnel with the wall above were a big problem when I've spoken before about St. Stephen's School moving out of Williamson's own house and moving down to Smithdown Lane, just to the left of the picture here. And the headmaster used to complain about loose masonry possibly falling on kids in the playground. So we know that in around 1898-9, the Great Curtain Wall, brick wall, was built right across the front of this tunnel and these arches to make it safe. This picture, I think, dates from 1998, and it shows the land behind that high wall, and hopefully the Great Tunnel is somewhere behind there. In fact, a little while later, FOWT had the opportunity to have a dig into the wall at that point there. The land was partitioned off at that time, and not all in the same ownership. This, by the way, is Willie's garage, which replaced Joseph Williamson's house up there. This photograph, taken a little bit later, somewhere between 1999 and 2002, is looking at the same area, that high wall there, and there's the spot where we tried to get into the Great Tunnel. And this, I think, is early in 2003, the winter of 2002-03, and the land is becoming quite overgrown. And by this point, we were starting to work on various people who were responsible for this land to try and get permission for a dig, to dig in through this high curtain wall. The dig point was somewhere in the undergrowth there on the other side of the fence. And by June 2003, we finally got permission from the magnate joinery factory owners, Mr. Kasim, who owned the flats and the land behind, and various other people. And we got permission to have a dig and try and get in through that wall to see if we could find the great tunnel. This is the beginning of that dig. Very hopeful, I think, without much knowledge, using a drill there to try and drill in through the base of the wall to see how deep it might be. They got a big surprise. They continued a little bit there. They're starting to dig out the brickwork behind there. And then as it goes on, they're going deeper and deeper through layer after layer of brick into that wall. We're now a long way in. And then eventually, that's it. 6 foot thick brickwork. This is one massive wall. And nobody expected that. When they got through the brickwork, they just found spoil behind it. And they had no idea whether they were too high, too low, too far to the left or right, but they were running out of time, and they just had to brick it all up, reinstate the wall, and walk away without any success. But at the same time, just off to the right of this picture, they did manage to get into the triple-decker tunnel, which I've spoken about in an earlier talk. So it wasn't all wasted. And if you look at this point here, the top of the area that's been excavated out, I can tell you that that point there now is at ground level. So the ground has been altered substantially since those days. It's now much higher. A year later, this was in November 2004, Mr. Kasim, who had bought these old council flats on Elm Grove, now appears to own all of the land because the fence across the middle has gone. The high wall is there. The ground level has been raised quite substantially. He's been using earth movers on this land and remodeled all sorts of things and changed the layout. He was preparing to put down some large shipping containers on this land. And what he was doing there, we have no idea. But in November 2004, we managed to get permission from him to come onto the land while he was still working there and to do a borehole survey. We took on a company who dug 4 boreholes for us. I think borehole number 1 is where the tripod is set up there behind the red vehicle. Very interesting that the bedrock, sandstone bedrock in all of this area should be just a few feet below the ground. But at that particular spot, they went down 18.5 meters. That's nearly 60 feet before they hit the bedrock. So something's going on under there, and I assume it's a very deep quarry. Boreholes number 3 and 4 were in the distance behind there, and they only went down 3.5, 4 meters before they hit the bedrock, as expected. Number 2 borehole was behind this white vehicle, and this is where we were hoping to strike lucky and find a large chamber, a Williamson chamber, which we believed to be there from the army plans. And we found it. This diagram sort of shows the layout. This is the railway cutting. The high wall is up here with the magnet joinery factory above it. 1 block of flats there, a block of flats here. There's borehole number 1, 18.5 meters it went down. Number 2 and number 3 turned up nothing. Sorry, number 3 and 4 turned up nothing. This one's number 2. Number 2 went down about 4 meters, or 3 to 4 meters. Then it went through some brickwork. Then it went into a void, and then more spoil, which is a dead giveaway that there's a Williamson tunnel under there. So Mr. Kasim, the landowner, was being quite good to us, I believe, at that time. There he is there, standing at the back. Don't think he's very happy, but he's allowed us to bring a digger on the very next day and to dig down here and excavate for this tunnel. And by another one of those absolute coincidences and lucky strikes, where we dug down at this point was exactly the spot where a company had been exploring this land, checking it out in 1954 for the council while they were trying to decide exactly where to build the flats, looking for the safest spot to build them. And they had gone down at this point and they discovered a chamber down here. They'd broken through the roof, and then before they filled the hole in, they'd put a sheet of steel over it or a piece of corrugated iron and then filled it in. And when we dug down at this spot, we hit exactly the same spot, took out the sheet of steel, and we had a nice hole to go in without having to do any damage to the roof. And we were in. Quite a large chamber, but there wasn't really very much of it accessible. Full of rubble as usual. Stalactites on the roof. There's one of our lads in there. And then this is the rear wall of it closest to the flats and Smithdown Lane, solid bedrock wall. And in the opposite direction across this way, there was a massive collapse in the roof. The roof was made in brick, many layers of brick thickness, and quite a wide chamber, but a great chunk of it had cracked away and slumped onto the spoil heap, and it was too dangerous to go any further. We couldn't see how far it went, but this was in the direction towards the high brick retaining wall, so we couldn't tell whether the chamber went right up to the wall or under it and continued. Of course, we had to bury it again almost straight away, but at least we'd found it and recorded it. And as you can see, it's full of all this sandstone waste again, very similar to the chamber we found on the Merseyflex land. So I would think this has probably been used as a dumping ground for waste material from the construction of the railway cutting, because it's only a few yards away from it. Now, this plan, overhead view, shows you pretty much what's going on here. This is our Williamson house site. The high brick retaining wall is running along here. You can't see it, it's underneath shrubs and trees. This is where we believe the great tunnel is, this yellow one here, running from that point. Mr. Kasim, at a later date, has built a big shed here up against the wall, no longer there. And this is the area where that chamber is that we just discovered, quite close to the corner of this block of flats, right there. And this one, of course, is the triple-decker tunnel, which ran right through where the railway cutting is now. So moving forward, this is right up to early 2019. In 2017, there had been this massive collapse of the railway cutting wall, which is just off to the left of this photograph, which blocked the line and shut down Lime Street Station for over a week. Network Rail and their contractors moved into there immediately and moved masses of earth away from the cutting wall, took out everything that Mr. Kasim had in here, large shipping containers and his shed, and everything was gone. And they put a fence across the land to keep people away from the railway cutting. Obviously, that was very dangerous now. They made it safe and then they walked away. They didn't come back until early 2019 to actually do the repairs and rebuild the wall and strengthen it. And by this time, they were just about to move on in, I think it was March of 2019. And Morgan Sindall's, the developers who were going to build the big multi-story car park on this site, had just moved in. And they were getting ready to start demolishing the flats at the same time. And it seems that they had some big machines on there. And we came in one Wednesday morning and found that they told us that on the day before, the Tuesday, there had been one great whoosh of escaping air and a great crater developed in the ground here, where the chamber that we discovered back in 2003 had just collapsed. They say there were no machines on top of it at the time, although we know that a lot of big earth-moving machines had been trundling over there backwards and forwards for the last couple of years because of the railway cutting problem. But anyway, that tunnel was, that chamber was compromised. We knew it had a very damaged roof, and now, unfortunately, we've lost it altogether. There's you can see the size of the crater, Fortunately, there was so much spoil in there that it didn't fall very far. But it caused a big problem for Network Rails people who had to drive their big machines across here. They needed to do a lot of work to verify that this was going to be safe before they could drive across it. This is pretty much how the area at the base of the high wall looks now. A bit of a no man's land. The triple-decker tunnel lies under there at that end. We want to get back into that one. And our land is below this concrete wall here. So the triple-decker tunnel runs from about this point and towards the railway cutting. The point where our people dug in through this wall in 2003 is about here at ground level. So it would have been up there, but the land has been raised quite substantially since those days. Now then, this is where you might think it's going to get boring. I've always thought that for a speaker to put up slides containing text and then to read them is one of the most boring things that you can do and doesn't make for a good talk. But unfortunately, this time I'm going to do just that. Now, I have this rather nice piece of writing from the Liverpool Mercury, and this is entitled the Inspection of the First Lancashire Engineer Volunteers. And it took place on Saturday, the 22nd of July, 1876. And it was reported in the Liverpool Mercury on Monday, the 24th of July, 1876. And it concerns an inspection that was carried out on the first Lancashire Engineer Volunteers. That's the first page of it, which Don Hyam brought me. And I had never seen this before, and it's such a lovely piece of writing and told me such a lot that confirmed for me that the Great Tunnel was as we thought it was. There's page 2. I'll read some of it, but not all of it. And this backs up an earlier piece of writing which I have known about for several years and which I've reported to you in another one of my talks about the construction of the railway cutting, an excursion to Liverpool by the North Staffordshire Institute of Mining and Mechanical Engineers, which took place on the 4th of December, 1882. And again, I think it's a lovely piece of writing. This Victorian writing style I find quite funny, but really, really nice to read. There are 2 pages of this as well. I won't read it all, but I am going to read some of it to you. Just before we go there, here's the army plan of the known Williamson tunnels under this land. And this is the version that was supplied to the visiting members from the North Staffordshire Institute of Mining and Mechanical Engineers. This is a section of it that was sent to them to include in their write-up and their report of that event. And the railway cutting is here. The triple-decker tunnel, our part of it is under this land here, which we've been in. The other remains of it is under the stable yard. This is our land, 40 to 44 Mason Street, and this is where we believe the Great Tunnel is. The big, high retaining wall runs right along here with a whole series of arches dug into the hillside alongside. I don't believe these are tunnels. I think they're just short arches, but the Great Tunnel there is the one we're looking for. So I'm going to leave you with this very nice James Mudd photograph on the screen while I read this. So the annual inspection of the first Liverpool Engineer Volunteers took place on Saturday. The inspecting officer was Major Harvey, Royal Engineers. Early in the day, Major Harvey visited the quarters of the Corps in Mason Street, Edge Hill, and inspected the engineering done by the men. The ground at the disposal of the regiment has recently been extended by the addition of part of a tunnel running underneath the storehouse and the adjoining buildings. The tunnel, which is of great size, is the largest of those made in this district by the late eccentric Mr. Williamson. The Corps found it filled up, and by much patient labour, they cleared out about 120 feet of it, which they now use for modelling. The engineering course for the year is military bridges, and 9 of these, 6 of full size and 3 in model quarter size, have been constructed. B Company, Captain Strongitharms, have made a bridge of full size with 38 feet span upon piers of gabions or cylinders of wickerwork filled with stones. Such bridges are used with success in attacking fortresses, the garrisons of which have the means of flooding or rendering dry the ditches at pleasure. When a ditch over which such a bridge is laid is flooded, the water runs through the gabions and leaves the bridge intact. And when the water is withdrawn, the gabions sink and rest upon the bottom without affecting the strength of the bridge. B Company have also made a single lock bridge of 30 feet span, quarter size. C Company, Captain Coleman's, have a full-sized and massive stiffened sling bridge of 50 feet span, which would carry the heaviest traffic. D Company, Captain Drew's, have in model a double lock bridge, whilst E Company, Captain Williamson'S, have a barrel pier bridge of 3 spans. F Company, Captain Baggott's, with Lieutenant Samuelson in temporary command, have a single sling bridge, quarter size. The sling and lock bridges, it may be explained, are constructed of spars lashed together in pairs with cross pieces to carry the roadway and diagonals to keep them from getting out of shape. G Company, Captain Greaves's, have made a full-size bridge, 38 feet span, upon trestles, of which there are 3 of different patterns. H Company, Captain Chantrell's, have constructed a railway bridge with a span of 35 feet. The idea of this structure is that an enemy has destroyed the original railway bridge and the advancing army utilises the materials left to repair the damage. J Company, Captain Bremner's, have built an ingenious suspension bridge of iron bands laid 3 deep and 10 wide. The bridge has a span of 40 feet and the strength of each band has been tested up to 3,000 pounds, so that the bridge would bear a great weight. The bridges, which are well worth a visit, are to remain open to the public and inspection for a fortnight. In the evening, the corps was inspected at Kensington. It then lists all the officers who were present. And right at the end, what does he say? The colonel was gratified to see in the books a large number of good attendances, and when he considered the great interest taken by the officers in the regiment, this was perhaps not a ground for much surprise. In conclusion, he urged the few men who had not attended regularly to be more diligent in their duties. The corps then marched back to the stores. Wonderful, I think. Wonderful. So that for me is absolute proof that the Great Tunnel was there. It was used for bridge building, and with bridges up to 50 feet in length and 9 bridges in total, it must have been quite big. Now the second piece of writing from 1882. This is the visit of the North Staffordshire Institute of Mining and Mechanical Engineers to Liverpool. I read here, this is written by their secretary in 1883 in their journal. The third excursion of the members of the Institute for 1882 took place on Monday the 4th of December, when a visit was paid to Liverpool for the purpose of inspecting the Lime Street tunnel works of the London and North Western Railway Company and the New Mersey docks. The excursionists, of whom there was a fair muster, travelled by train, leaving Stoke at 8:30 and arriving at Edge Hill Station at 10:30. They were there met by Mr. Henry A. Dibbin, who, acting under the direction of Mr. F. Stevenson, the chief engineer of the London and North Western Railway Company, has charge of the tunnel works and conducted the visitors over the same. I won't read what he says about that, but before leaving the railway works, the excursionists had an opportunity of inspecting the curious tunnels constructed in the early part of the century by Mr. Joseph Williamson, an eccentric gentleman who accumulated considerable wealth and owned much property between Lime Street and Edge Hill, and who was termed the King of Edge Hill. It is related of him that being asked one severe winter to head a subscription list to alleviate the distress amongst the poor, he pointed to the men in his employ, one of them being an old man who was slowly turning a grindstone without any tools to be sharpened, merely to provide some occupation for him. It has been conjectured that he spent £100,000 in excavations, cutting immense tunnels and caverns through solid rock without design and useless, at least with no other good object than employing the poor. It has been thought by some persons that Mr. Williamson had some notion of creating posthumous fame, for few persons were permitted to see his works after they were completed. Dr. Watson was one of the favoured few, and in an account which he has given of them, he describes the works as perfect marvels, not only for their great extent, but for the excellence of their construction and their inapplicability to any possible purpose. Vaults and passages of various sizes were constructed by his direction under his property, 3 tunnels wide enough for 2 lines of railway being opened in the course of the railway works now being carried out. In addition to this was another enormous tunnel now used as a volunteer drill shed, which the members of the Institute entered and examined with some degree of curiosity. Some of Mr. Williamson's excavations would appear to be advantageous to the railway company as deposits for spoil, but at any rate, in one place, great cost and inconvenience have been caused by them in the making of the new cutting, inasmuch as it has necessitated an excavation 10 feet below the Lime Street tunnel before obtaining a safe foundation for the side retaining walls. Mr. Williamson's costly excavations are rapidly being destroyed and neither afford profit to his friends nor serve any other purpose than to perpetuate a knowledge of the folly he committed. I think that's a great piece of writing. I never get tired of reading those over again. So I think everything there really proves that the Great Tunnel does exist. It's exactly what we thought it was, and it has been used by the military to great use as a drill shed before they had a proper drill hole built on the land where the magnet joinery factory used to stand. But that's it. I feel now convinced that the Great Tunnel, as long as it hasn't been destroyed, was exactly where we think it is and underneath that land. All we've got to do is keep on trying to get in there. But I have a feeling that it's going to be very much lower down in the ground, bearing in mind that 18.5-meter drop before hitting the bedrock with that borehole survey. So I think it's way, way down below there, built into a very deep quarry. But we shall see. Hopefully we'll find it one day. So that's about all I've got to show you. Thank you for watching.